Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lab Manager's Product Spotlight webinar series. My name is Mary Beth DiDonna, and I'll be moderating today's discussion, Informatics Solutions to Increase Efficiency and Performance in Molecular Workflows. We like our webinars to be very interactive, so we encourage you to submit your questions to us at any point during today's webinar. Our speakers will address these questions during the question and answer session following their presentation. To ask a question or make a comment, simply type your query into the Q&A box located on the right-hand side of your screen. We will try to address as many questions as possible during our time together, but if we happen to run out of time, I will forward any unanswered questions to today's speakers and they can respond to you directly if possible. Additional resources for today's presentation are also located on the right-hand side of your screen in the handout section. I would like to remind you that this webinar recording will be available on demand shortly following this live presentation, so please watch your emails for information from Lab Manager on how to access this free video once it's available. I would especially like to thank STARLIMS for sponsoring this event. Their support allows Lab Manager to keep these webinars free of charge for our readers. So with that, I would like to introduce our presenters for today's webinar. As Principal Software Engineer, Marius Popovich leads the development of the STARLIMS Life Sciences product suite, including the Life Sciences, Healthcare, and Public Health Solutions. Over his 18-year career at STARLIMS, Marius has served in several roles, including LIMS Implementation Specialist, R&D Software Engineer, and Project Manager. He holds a BSc in Computer Science from the Technical University of Cluj-Napoca in Romania. Marius lives in the Fort Lauderdale area and is an avid endurance sports enthusiast, completing in the Ironman triathlon, running, and open water swimming events. Brendan McMahon is a software tester with over 8 years of software quality assurance experience. He currently serves as a subject matter expert on test automation and leads automated testing activities for STARLIMS. Brendan has worked across the various product teams at STARLIMS and has been exposed to the different industries that STARLIMS serves around the world. Marius and Brendan, thanks for joining us today. Marius, please begin.
Thanks, Mary Beth. So let's quickly go over today's webinar agenda. I will first introduce STARLIMS and the STARLIMS Life Sciences solution for those who are not familiar with our offering. And then we will focus on the features of the Life Sciences workflow engine and workflow processing modules and follow up with a live demonstration of its capabilities. I will then do a brief overview of our latest release version 11.3 and provide a sneak peek into some of our upcoming features, which will be included in our next release 11.4. Finally, my co-presenter Brendan McMahon will do a quick presentation of the automation validation framework and testing kit, and then we will open it up for Q&A. So let's get started. STARLIMS provides a comprehensive set of solutions to meet the needs of clinical research, biorepository, and molecular laboratories. The Life Sciences solution helps manage complex clinical and molecular protocols, including reference ranges, triggers, reflexes, and reporting requirements. The solution supports sample and test workflows from start to finish, allowing for batch adjustments and multiple batch templates to be used in one complex workflow, and evaluate sample test results against different sets of specifications and controls the progress of the sample or batch throughout its life cycle. It helps improve efficiency by generating worksheets and automating result calculations and rules. STARLIMS also has powerful interfacing capabilities for linking to third-party systems, internal or external, for data analysis prior to results reporting. The material management, sample management, inventory, and biorepository modules can handle clinical research lab workflows, including specimen collection, receiving, testing, and processing, storage location management, querying, and referral. The Life Sciences solution helps you streamline and automate day-to-day lab logistics. It does this through automating the import of e-manifest, test results, test requests, test result files, and STARLIMS will also interface to automated specimen handling systems and analytical instruments, allowing it to perform system-to-system communication via web services, file transfer, such as text files, CSV, HL7, and so on, and direct database communications in some cases. STARLIMS tracks and manages chain of custody with electronic signatures, and it can also manage customer billing and invoicing for specimen shipping, processing, and testing. It provides a complete ordering, packing, and shipping solution using its shipping workflow tools. STARLIMS has been designed to help your organization comply with a wide range of reference of different laboratory regulatory standards, including the FDA 21 CFR Part 11 and the EU Annex 11 guidelines, GLP, APHS, CLIA, CAB, and other accreditation standards. So let's jump into workflow engine and workflow processing, which will be the focus of today's presentation. The STARLIMS workflow engine is a collection of applications that allow you to describe workflows which require multiple steps to support complex workflow sample treatment and testing. You can define inputs, outputs, equipment, reagents, controls, transactions, routings for each step of the workflow. You can prepare and process samples, store them, and produce a final result or conclusion. For laboratory teams, the workflow engine facilitates workload management and prioritization, as well as ensuring correctness and traceability through peer review, electronic signature requirements, audit, and traceability. When executing a workflow, the workflow engine will take an input defined as a combination sample type or container type and process it into an output or derivative sample of the input. Apart from performing this core transformation, the processing step will generate results, collect data on equipment used, reagents, and control lot numbers, or perform any extra actions as defined by the workflow configuration. Upon finishing a step, outputs can be routed to an optional or conditional peer review step, or a routing rule can be evaluated to determine the next step in the current workflow, or if the sample needs to be routed to a different workflow altogether. When defining workflow steps, we can indicate the desired order of execution for each step. Different workflow steps can be performed by different groups of analysts and in different locations within the organization. We can also indicate the time by which the step must be completed and routed to the next one. In addition, each step can be configured to automatically route to peer review. During peer review, a team member can review the batch or run of samples processed through the step and can release them to the next step or return them back to the original analyst. Different e-signature templates with specific requirements, such as witness signature, additional comments, and so on, can be associated with this step. Let's talk about the workflow engine inputs. Workflow engine inputs are samples or derivatives defined as combinations of sample type, container type, or plate type. Each workflow step defines its list of acceptable inputs. A sample or derivative is accepted for processing only if it can be matched with one of the step's possible input definitions. Each possible input is matched with a step output. As a result of step processing, output derivatives are generated and then routed to the next workflow step, where they become inputs for that step. Outputs are new derivatives being generated through step processing. As such, an output can be configured to generate new labels. We can also indicate whether the newly created sample needs to be stored in inventory, by repository, and if we are collecting any results for the output in this step. Let's talk about routing. Outputs are routed to other steps in the same workflow, or they can be routed to other workflows altogether. We can define several route types, such as peer review, other routes, standby, and hard stop. Each route can have an associated condition, and a condition can be defined on specific result fields and values, such as in spec or out of spec status, limits, and so on. For peer review, there is also a step-level peer review setting, which would always route all outputs to a peer review step. At the level of output, we can also indicate if peer review is required and associate a condition with that requirement so that only a subset of outputs are being routed for peer review. For example, all those outputs with positives or invalid results. For each workflow step, we can define a list of equipment that we use, and when marked as required, the user will be required to select that specific equipment ID that they are using in that step. If only one equipment is in service, the system will automatically select it for that step. For each step, we can also define the list of reagents that are being used. For each reagent, we can specify if it's part of a master mix calculation, as in the case of a PCR workflow. We can also indicate if reagent inventory is tracked and if inventory should be automatically consumed by the specified amount indicated. For step controls, we can specify the control type and level. We can also indicate if we are tracking the inventory, in which case a lot number or inventory ID must be selected before completing the step. The system can automatically select the appropriate lot number based on expiration date and amount left. The system will select the oldest lot number so inventory is used efficiently. When QC Manager result is selected, the control results are being synced with the STARLIMS QC Manager so they can be included in quality control calculations such as Westcott rules, Levy-Jennings control charts, and so on. At each step, we collect results for step outputs. A total of 15 results can be collected for each result, and for each result, we can define limits, units, calculations, rounding rules, and possible choices from a predefined list. A step can also map to the reported conclusion when this is the last step in the workflow. At each step, we can also define a list of actions that are available to execute. STARLIMS comes out of the box with a library of predefined workflow actions. Actions can be defined at different levels for a batch run, for plates or individual samples. Each action can require an electronic signature, and access can be restricted by role. The workflow engine supports custom actions, which can be created using the STARLIMS designer and then plugged into the actions library. This is also a great feature which allows further flexibility to extend or tailor a workflow to specific needs. Custom actions can be used to export or import data from a third-party system, such as a bioinformatics solution, interface instruments, as well as define custom algorithms for generating outputs. We can collect additional metadata for each step in the form of questionnaires, and question forms can be defined and then attached to workflow steps. They can be used to collect. They can be used as checklists or simply to collect additional information as free text or from choosing from a predefined list of options. Let's look at the workflow engine and have a quick demo of some of its capabilities. So let me share my screen here. And the slideshow. All right. So we are looking at the STARLIMS workflow engine, which is the configuration side of this. I'll be looking at a COVID-19 simplified workflow. It's a simpler two-step workflow. Given the constraints of time that we have today, I think it's a good example that can showcase a lot of the capabilities of workflow engine, even though it's less complicated than some of the workflows that the workflow engines can handle. So let's look at COVID-19 simplified here. We have two steps, the extraction, RNA, and PCR testing. And let's look at the first step, extraction RNA, and look at some of the configuration that we have here. Then we'll run the workflow and look at the capabilities of workflow processing. So just so that we understand what we'll be showing later, let's look at extraction RNA here. We have a step with an input such defined as acceptable sample for COVID-19 molecular testing. It will come in as a nasal swab collected in this container type, and it will map to an output of extracted RNA in a 96 well plate container. So the outputs list here will reflect that. Then we will look at routings, and we can see that, yeah, it's pretty basic. Once we execute the extraction RNA, then we go to the next step in the workflow, which is COVID-19 in the same workflow, COVID-19 simplified, and we will do PCR testing step. There's no equipment or reagents at this step, and as far as actions, we enabled the following actions: automap samples to plate, cancel test for run, and a cancel test for sample. So these actions will be available to choose from when executing the workflow. Then we'll continue with PCR testing, where we will receive the input from the previous step and produce a 384 well plate. And let's take a look at some of the other configuration here, such as routings. 1 second. All right. So in the case of PCR testing, our routing setup looks like this. We have PCR plate with extracted RNA will be ran, and essentially this will be the last step in the workflow. But we have a special case being handled here where we define a condition on the result field, such as when results are positive, we route them to an additional peer review step. So this is an example where we defined a peer review type routing at the output level. We will be using equipment, and we've set it up here, and we marked it as required. I don't think we have any reagents here, but we do use two controls, a negative and a positive control, for which we track inventory. As far as results go, we will be collecting a result such as positive, negative, or invalid. It will be populated from a lookup. And let's take a look at some of the actions that we can perform. Again, automap, cancel. We'll have some, we'll look at how to import or export the results. A merge plate action, and retest and storing. Okay, so let's run through the workflow. But first of all, let's take a look at some of the ways we can log in samples in STARLIMS. So one of the ways is through manual sample login using the clinical sample login application, where we create orders one by one by entering their demographics, selecting a panel, and logging it in and routing it through the workflow. Another way to accept samples in the system is through what we call e-manifest, and for that we can use our import queues application here. So let me just show a quick example where we import an e-manifest file from an Excel spreadsheet, which we can see here. We'll quickly upload this and process it. So this should be validated pretty quickly, and we can process it and produce samples that will be routed through the workflow and eventually be tested. Another way to accept samples into the workflow is through biorepository by creating a new reception. So this could be introduced as inventory biorepository samples. Or the reception can be finalized here, and we can use one of the available transactions to assign the COVID-19 panel test to all the samples that were received. So yeah, that would be here. Another way to log in samples is through our customer portal, and that's shown here. So external submitting customers of the lab can use our customer portal to submit requests. It's a very simple three-step process, entering demographics, filling in any additional metadata in the form of a questionnaire, and the panel is selected as part of this initial screen, and those samples will be again routed to the system in workflow processing. Another way is using our mobile application for the data sample collection. So again, a very simple process of generating a new collection, following a few steps to provide required metadata. And selecting the panel we want to log in, providing the demographics, and those samples will be logged in. Another way to receive samples is electronically through our REST API. We make this available. We publish the API so that third-party integrations could be achieved, such as external portals, or third-party applications could be used to submit samples to STARLIMS. Besides that, we also have a system interface guide for HL7 integrations, and we provide detailed specifications for incoming orders through HL7 and our outgoing result specifications HL7 as well. Yeah, let's get back to workflow processing. So I will log in as I'm currently logged in as an analyst here, and I will look at my notification area here. Now, there's two ways of proceeding forward. One is as an analyst, I get work assigned to me, which is then available in my workflow processing. Work can be assigned by a supervisor, for example, using the workflow user assignment application. So let's open that really quickly. And what we see here is the list of workflows and steps with that have pending orders. So if we look at COVID-19 Simplified, there's a backlog of 1,500 samples here. I can click on that step and see what's pending. Again, I'm in the workflow user assignment step. So as a supervisor, I can assign specific samples to an analyst, or I can indicate a specific priority for groups of samples or some individual samples. So I can say that, yeah, this is urgent. I could just do this assignment, or I could actually create runs and assign them to that analyst for execution. Once those assignments are made, an analyst can view its workload in workflow processing, in my workflow processing, which is shows what work is currently assigned to that person. We can see here that this person only has the COVID-19 workflow, and there's currently no pending samples, but there is a run that's being assigned to them, and that we just created a few seconds ago. Another view of workflow processing is my team's workflow processing, where team members can collaborate and view the entire backlog that's being assigned to their team. Remember, workflow engine steps can be assigned to specific teams, and this is a team view over the current backlog of the lab. So let's use this view here to process those samples. So I will go to COVID-19 Simplified here, and yeah, there's a backlog of 1,500 samples here. I have a run here in progress, but let me clear it out. What can we do is, yeah, let's take a larger batch of samples, such as 300 samples. I will create a run for it and proceed to processing. So at this point, the system generates a new run. It will route me to the run processing screen, where we will see the current run and all the runs that are currently in process. If we look at the counters here, we can see the list of the backlog has been reduced by the number of samples assigned to this run, and we can see that this other counter here has increased, which shows the number of samples that are currently being worked on as part of our run. So let's look at this last run that we just created here. So we have samples as inputs. We can look at their sample types. So we have nasal swabs. We have about 300 of them, and at this point they're in the form of inputs. To proceed, we need to generate the outputs from this step by clicking process here, and this will generate at first the output plate for RNA extracted samples. So if we look at plates here, we have an output plate, and at this point it's empty, and we will use a quick transaction such as automap samples to plate to populate it. What this will do is show us, try to map as many samples as possible to this plate. It's a 96 well plate. Remember, we have 300 samples waiting there, so obviously we cannot put everything on a 96 well plate, which is why we see this message here. But it was able to map to fully assign 96 samples to it. So let's click OK, and we can look at the progress here, or we can close it and the action can execute in the background. So what we have is the first of 4 plates that we need to produce from this step. We can add additional plates here. So I will say yes, and I will map those as well. Okay. So we see those mapped. I will add a new plate and the 4th one. Auto map this plate. And click OK. So at this point, we should have some leftover samples that we can map to the 4th plate. And for that, we can use edit layout here and look at the list of samples that are remaining. We can select them all and drag them onto the plate. So this is the manual mapping mode, where we can just we can scan samples from the list of pending samples, or we can simply drag and drop samples to the plate. We can specify a fill pattern, such as going horizontal, or vertical, like we see here. Let's click OK. So at this point, this plate is also mapped. And I believe we can continue on with the next workflow step. And we indicate that we're ready to do so by clicking Finish here. So at this point, the 4 plates should be moving on to the next step, which is PCR testing. And we can see that, yeah, we have 300 samples here waiting to be assigned to PCR testing. Over here, we need to build our run, and we can do so by either scanning samples using the scan barcode feature here, or we can do an assignment by plate. So we can see that there's 4 12x8 plates here waiting to be assigned, and I can just simulate a scan and move those samples from the plates in to my run. So let's move all of these, and 36, then 337. Okay. I will create my run and just follow the same process we did before. We can look at the run work list here. We can see our inputs. In this point, the sample type of the input is extracted RNA from the previous step. Yeah, let's since the next step in the flow would be to take those 4 plates that were provided as inputs and merge them on to a larger 384 well plate. We will use this action here, merge plates. So let's click on that. this is going to come up and show me the list of available plates for merging. I will say yes, please select all. And we'll click next, where we can see a preview of the merged plate. We should be seeing a larger plate with all samples included on it. So let's click finish here and execute the merge. So this will take a few seconds here to complete, and it should generate a output plate, a 384 word plate containing all the samples from the 4 input plates. All right, so let's take a look. Should take a second or so to appear. So there we go. We have our output plate, and let's wait for this to load up. Okay. What we can do here is look at plate genealogy, which will show us that, yes, this plate, the PCR plate, as we call it here, was created as a result of merging these 4 input plates. We also have controls here that we need to assign to the plate, so we can use edit plate layout to add those controls. So let's see. We have a negative and positive control. Let's select them and drag them onto the plate. All right, so we add them over there. Let's say OK. Let's exit. And this should refresh and show us the two controls added onto the plate layout. So let's wait for that to. Okay. And we see the negative and positive controls here. Let's take a look at currently what we have here under samples. And see that, yeah, we have our inputs, extracted RNA, and our outputs generated. We have, before we move on to the next plate, we can step, we can also look at sample genealogy here. So for our output, we can see that, yes, this was originally added to inventory when we logged in the sample. We went through the first step of the workflow. We generated the derivative, and now we're at the second step of the COVID-19 simplified workflow, where this would be like the extracted RNA with with PCR tested. So let's simulate results entry here. And for that, I created 2 custom actions which I plugged in. One is the generate CSV file for import and import CSV from file. So normally at this point, we would have an action running in the background, automatically retrieving results from instruments. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I will illustrate it by simulating that process with a CSV file import. So let's do that. This generates a sample input file. Let's open it up. It will show me all the samples in the run, and it pre-populates all the results to negative. So let's pick some of these and put them positive. So let's save it and re-import it using the import CSV file action. Okay. So the file will be processed, and those results should be imported successfully here. Yes, it will refresh and show me this crosstab view of samples with the results I've just imported. So you see the two positive results that were included in there. Yeah, let's take a look at plates. We'll have our input plates and our outputs, equipment. For equipment, we have an equipment that was set up, and that equipment ID was automatically selected by the system because it's the only equipment of that type that is currently in service. Let's look at controls, and for those controls, the same system automatically determined which inventory ID we should use based on current availability and inventory and expiration date. So it picked this control here, and we'll go with it. So at this point, yeah, we have a larger COVID-19 test run here with results. We can finish it and complete the workflow. Remember, we set up a rule for which would route all positive results to a peer review step. So let's take a look at our administrator. I will log in as an administrator, and yeah, let me put in my password here, and we see that there's an additional workflow review action reminder here for me. I will open it up, and I should be able to see under COVID-19 simplified PCR testing that we have we have some results to review. So these are the two positive results from my previous run. I can choose to release it or send it back to the original analyst. So let me put it in here. I will enter my electronic signature to release the run. And at this point, these samples are proceeding forward, just like the rest of them. And next step would be, the results we entered have transferred over to the original order, and they're available for reporting. We can look at our order results view, where we can see all the orders currently in the system, and let's see if we can find some of these COVID-19 results here. So we'll look at all the pending request released samples, and I think our sample should be on the last page here. Okay, so let's take this one here as an example. Yes, we see, this was tested today. We have a negative result, and at this point, we can generate a request report or preview a request report. So this is what would look as the final report as it's reported out from the system. I think that concludes my demonstration. Let me get back to my slides here with just a quick note regarding our highlights from the current release and next release of Life Sciences. So 1 second, let's... Yeah, so like I said before, we move on. I just like to spend a few seconds here highlighting some of the features in our current release besides what we just saw. Our 11.3 Life Sciences release also includes a Life Sciences automated validation framework and testing kit. We just introduced support for simplified Chinese translations in our entire solution. And of course, we made several performance improvements, usability enhancements, and bug fixes. As far as our next release, what you can look forward to is our additionally, we'll make additional enhancements to the workflow engine to support histopathology workflows. We're looking to integrate our workflow engines with our STARLIMS lab execution system, which is, or LES, which is a mobile touch-oriented application used to execute laboratory flows. What the vision is to be able to use workflow engine and send over to LES some steps for execution. You know, using a touch mobile device at the workbench, in some cases can be a lot more convenient than using a more complex desktop-oriented front end. So we're looking to do that. We're looking also to enhance the workflow engine by introducing advanced routing rules, leveraging our rule management module. And we're also going to have introduced a new sample reception module, and of course provide additional improvements and usability enhancements. With this, I'd like to turn it over to Brendan McMahon, my colleague, and he's going to talk about our life sciences automation validation framework and testing kit, and provide some information about that component. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marius. Appreciate it. And so, like Marius had mentioned, I'm going to speak about this automated validation framework and testing kit that has been released alongside this latest release of our STARLIMS product for life sciences. One of the things that I wanted to cover is what is included inside of this kit and how it can be used. And so when it comes to validation, there's one thing that I wanted to clarify, and that is verification and validation are two different things. And from my side of things here at STARLIMS, me and the testers on the teams that we work on, we are verifying that the product meets the design that we said the product is supposed to follow. And that design is important for a few reasons. A, when the developers are creating a button, they want to make sure that that button works the way that they designed it, that it looks the way that it's supposed to look, it interacts with the behind the scenes scripts the way it's supposed to, and that when you click it, the correct pop-up message appears that the user, can work with. That's all things that we verify from a testing point of view. But from a validation point of view, that the button, the way that it looks, the way that it interacts, none of that matters from a validation side. What matters is, can I use this product to do the things that I need to do? So, for example, I could technically have a validation test case on paper that I could apply to any product and use that to prove whether or not a product can do the things that I need it to do. But validation takes a lot of time, especially when it's all done on paper. So a lot of customers that I've talked to, a lot of our clients that are in the life sciences field, they suffer from validation deadlock, which I'm sure some of you have felt before as well, where you will validate an implementation of any product, any service, or any system that's in your lab, and then you kind of have things locked down for a while. And by lockdown, I mean you don't upgrade your operating system or your browser or introduce new equipment if you don't have to. Because what happens is the more you introduce, the more you update, the more you have to validate. And that creates these silos of outdated technology that it becomes difficult to upgrade, because if we do, we run into this validation landscape again that we don't want to waste time and resources on. So automation is one way to improve that. With automation, we can create scripts and test cases that can be ran daily, weekly, monthly, whenever you need to, be it after an operating system upgrade, a browser upgrade, introduction of new equipment, so that you can validate that your current workflows, the way that you use the system in your laboratory, that they still work after those updates have occurred. So you can do continuous validation as opposed to spending a ton of time and resources maybe months and months of work at one time and then never validating anything again until you get a new product update or change equipment years later. So it has the potential to reduce the amount of work that you do overall. So these automation kits that we've been making, one we made for our quality manufacturing product, and this one for our life sciences product offering. But what it is it's a automation framework that we developed that allows you to use a tool that the same tool that we use to interact with the STARLIMS objects that are on the screen in order to interact with those objects and create test cases. It also includes an application framework, which is a library of functions to interact with each application within the product. So for example, every button that's within the system is going to be identified the same way. And that's what the framework helps identify. But our application framework looks at a specific button within a specific application. Let's say the biorepository application. And I would have a function available called add bio rep, which allows me to add an item within that biorepository application. And then we take that framework and collection of application specific functions, and we can use them to create automated test cases. And this kit includes the exact same verification test cases that we use to verify that the product is meets the designs that the developers told me and the testing team that it is supposed to have. The kit also includes manual test cases for things that are not feasible for automation, with the goal to be to automate as much as we can so that when it comes to manually doing work, we spend as little time as possible. In addition, there's additional documentation included in these kits that we have found to be useful for you, being trace matrices or relationship diagrams for the different test cases and requirements that we developed against. Now, for these kits, there are some prerequisites to keep in mind. And one of those is that automation is program and knowledge. What I mean by that is that a lot of times automation has a buzzword potential where people hear automation and they want to implement it. But it is something that requires program and knowledge in order to do. Uh, the framework that we've created, it's done entirely in JavaScript. And so you do need to have a JavaScript basis in order to use this kit and to work with these test cases. But luckily, it's only basic to a moderate understanding of JavaScript. On my team, I have various levels of expertise when it comes to JavaScript on the testing side, and all of us have been able to accomplish working with the framework without any issues. In addition, we use a specific tool to make the test cases and the framework that we have in this kit, and that tool is Test Complete. It's made by a company named SmartBear. This tool, like any tool, the more familiar you are with it, the more experienced you are, the more ease of use it will have. But in general, it is a very simple and easy to use application. In addition, it does require a license, and that license is not provided by STARLIMS. We simply use this tool ourselves, and in this kit, we wanted to share with you the framework and the test cases that we have created so that you can choose to use them if you wish. In addition, before any validation activity, you should have the intended use case requirements for the application before you attempt to do any type of validation, as well as using this kit. That way you can plan your validation activities beforehand. For example, one thing that I recommend is with these requirements in hand of how you're going to use the product, what it is that your lab is required to do. If you have them beforehand, you can look at the different test cases that we provide and see if any of those test cases mirror or match any of the intended use cases that you have so that you can potentially use our verification scripts, which verify product functionality, as validation scripts, which will validate that the application does what you need it to do. But the main intended use is that the automation kit serves as a framework that you can utilize to create your own validation scripts. That way you can decrease the amount of time and effort that you put into validation and allow you to enter the world of automation without investing in building your own framework. Because regardless of whatever tools are used, you always need to build a framework beforehand. Then you can start building the automated tests that you would use. Now, here's an example of what these test cases look like. Forgive the resolution, but once again, they're all coded. But I basically am just telling the test what to do by calling an application and calling an action. So I have my collection of my uh, my framework library, which we call common functions. For my common functions, I'm going to open up an application and I define the application's name. I have a test manager application. I'm going to add a test. I have a test manager application, delete a test, common function, log out. Just a very simple example test case and how we would make them. And then at the end, when we execute these test cases, we get a log. And this log lets us see all the test cases that we executed. It keeps track of all the steps that were executed during that test. We can push to that log different requirements that are being tested. So for example, we can verify a new client category can be added, and then all the steps below that message prove that that requirement is being tested and that it is working properly. And then in addition, objective evidence is captured so that we can see what was actually done during the test. Screenshots will be captured at various points when we click on objects or enter in text and verify that something is within a data grid or any other type of verification that we are doing. We'll have a screenshot for it to prove that it actually did occur. That's just a brief summary of the overall intended use and what is included, and a little background information on these automated verification kits. And a thank you. That's really all that I had to share today.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Marius and Brendan. So at this time, we are going to move into our question and answer session with the audience. So again, for those of you who may have joined us late, you can send in your questions by typing them into the Q&A box located on the right-hand side of your screen. Even if you don't have a question, we invite you to leave a comment. Let us know how you enjoyed this presentation, if you found the information useful. And as a reminder, we do have an associated handout for you in the handout section that you can download for some more information. So Marius and Brendan, thanks for a great presentation. Let's go to the first question here from the audience. This one says, can the user request to skip a workflow step when executing a workflow?
Yes, so let me turn on my camera here. Yes, that can be done. There is a route sample transaction, or which can be, or an action which can be associated with a step, which gives you control and allows you to route that the particular sample to a specific test or a different workflow as well. So yes, that's possible.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's move on to the next question. This one says, are there any pre-configured workflows that are part of the default installation?
There are no pre-configured workflows in the default installation, but we do have this concept of content library. This is open for all of our customers, and it's accessible from our support portal. The content library for life sciences has two workflows there, one for a starter NGS workflow, and this COVID-19 simplified workflow that I've just demonstrated. Those could be downloaded and imported, and they could be used as a starting point to implement a more tailored workflow for that customer.
All right, wonderful, thank you. Here's another question that says, does the workflow engine support sample pooling?
Yes, there are several transactions which can help with that, and those are also included in the default library of transactions. There's different types of pooling by plate. There's so when using pooling by plate, you can actually, there's even more control there. You can pool multiple plates or pool just specific rows from every plate or specific columns. believe. Yeah, and there's also a pooling by sample transaction where I believe you can select individual samples into including sample pools or create pools automatically by specifying a pool size. Yeah, there's also support for adapter indexes. So we have those defined as materials in our material management application. And yes, you can define your adapter indexes there based on instrument manufacturer specifications. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. Here's another question that says, are any other languages besides JavaScript used within the automated test cases?
Within the test cases themselves, they're entirely JavaScript. There are some portions of the test cases where we have an API that is exposed from the STARLIMS side, and those APIs are going to be in the STARLIMS scripting language. But from the test cases themselves, those are going to be based in JavaScript.
All right, great, thank you. Here's another question that says, is Test Complete the only tool that can be used to perform automated testing with STARLIMS?
That's a good question, and no, it's not the only tool that can be used. You can find various automation tools that can work within the browser. We used Test Complete because it met the requirements that we had on our side when we picked a tool that we validated for our intended use. And we are offering the framework that we have created so that you can potentially use it if you'd like to as well. But since we made that framework using Test Complete, that would be the tool that you would have to use if you wanted to use the same framework that we made. Once again, to cut back on the task of you creating your own framework from scratch.
All right, great, thanks. We have a few more minutes left for questions, so let's scroll down a bit on the list. Let's make sure we get to this one. This one says, are there examples and tutorials for the automation kit?
There are plenty of examples. The entire kit is comprised of, I want to say, over 300 tests. Marius, does that number sound correct? About 300 tests individually?
Yes, I think
Yeah.
that's pretty close.
Ranging from very, very simple tests to what I just shown, what I had just shown on the screen, where it's very few lines to go through, to very, very complicated tests. For example, the tests that will test the workflow engine itself. So there's plenty of examples, both large and small, that can be looked at. And as for tutorials, if you mean tutorials for how to use the tool itself, that we don't provide. As for tutorials for the automated kit and how to use it, that's something that you could reach us for the question form on the contact us page, and we could provide more information as needed.
Okay, great, thanks. We have time for a few more questions. Let's go back up to the top of the list here. This one says, why is it limited to 15 result components per step?
Yeah, so that's actually my mistake there. It's actually 25. Yeah, I think 25 is it's a good number of results, and should cover the needs of most workflows. Yeah, but it's just to clarify, yes, it's 25, not 15.
Okay, great, thank you. This question says, is the import-export functionality in the workflow engine compatible with STARLIMS versions older than LS 11.3?
Yes, you will be able to import those packages, although there might be some differences where if we introduce additional configuration settings or obsoleted the previous settings, that maybe after import those will need to be adjusted a little bit. Also, we recommend that you upgrade first. That way, at least at the schema level, the fields and the database tables and so on would be and the relationships would match. that would be a requirement for importing older packages.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yes, we'll also be
Go
looking
ahead.
at, of course, providing specific versions of those packages for the current version as well.
All right, great, thanks. If you have time, I think we could take about 3 more questions. I know we got to the hour, but we can take a couple more minutes. In our version, retesting is performed manually and inherits functionality of manual routing. Does this version apply routing rules for retesting purposes, or is retesting still a manual process performed by the user?
Yeah, so it depends if you're using a custom retest transaction. In the out-of-the-box system, the retest sample should follow the normal workflow, and the retest will be processed as any other sample and routed as a regular sample. Now, as far as more advanced routing rules, yes, that's something that we're looking for introducing in our next release. Currently, routing rules can be set up. They can be rather simple rules set up to route conditionally based on results, certain results, and simple conditions like that. But we're looking to like I said, leverage our rule management module and allow you to define more advanced rules for routing, as well as several different actions that you could perform as a result of evaluating that rule, which would of course include retest and reflex and so on.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's take maybe 2 more questions. What versions of STARLIMS is the validation automation kit compatible with, and how backwards compatible is it?
Yeah, so good question. From a technical standpoint, that framework, the core framework of common functions that will let you interact with GUI objects on the screen, that technically would be compatible with any version of STARLIMS. The problem being that the library of functions that work across the different applications and then the test cases themselves, those are only going to be compatible with the latest release that the kit was partnered with, which was this current release 11.3.
All right, great, thanks. Let's make this the last question. This one says, is the user able to set up these workflows themselves, or do they need to hire an external implementation consultant?
Yeah, configuring the workflow engine, it does require some previous knowledge and familiarity with STARLIMS. I would suggest reading our user manual, which it's a great resource to get you started. I think there's another webinar resource that you can use that's published on our website. There's also the our STARLIMS Academy training that you can leverage as well. Of course, hiring an implementation consultant or our STARLIMS professional services will get you there faster. I think once you go through the process of implementing it once, then yes, it should become simpler. Of course, creating custom actions and so on does require some programming language, programming knowledge. In which case, yes, the need of a consultant or a professional services, it's probably the best way to go.
All right, wonderful. Thanks so much. So this brings us to the end of this webinar. And again, I'd just like to remind you that this webinar will be available for free on-demand viewing shortly following this live presentation. So please look for an email from Lab Manager once that video is available. You can also visit labmanager.com/webinars, which is on your screen right now, and we will post the video there once it is available. So on behalf of Lab Manager, I'd like to thank Marius Popovich and Brendan McMahon for all the hard work they put into this presentation. And I would like to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Once again, I'd like to thank our webinar sponsor, STARLIMS. Their support allows Lab Manager to offer these webinars free of charge for our readers. For more information on all of our upcoming or on-demand webinars, or to learn more about the latest tools and technologies for the laboratory, please visit our website at labmanager.com. We hope you can join us again. Thank you and have a great day.